I hope that everyone can hear me. I had to switch to a different location, but let's go ahead and get started. Welcome again to our Whole Living Academy community workshops, Kwanzaa community workshops of Barigani. Today is Kaumba creativity, which is really fitting considering that this next lecture is on creating culturally relevant curriculum. This is really important because it can be very easy to just go online and to find resources for curriculum that already exist, even if they are incongruent with what we want to present to our children, to our students, that is based in our culture, right? So, learning how to create our own curriculum is especially pertinent for Kaumba. Let's jump in here. So, the first question that you want to ask yourself in thinking about creating culturally relevant curriculum would be, who are the adults that you are teaching and nurturing your students to become? We can get really caught up in just, okay, this is what we learned, so this is what we need to teach them, or this is what they need to know to be able to go back into the public school. So this is what we need to teach them. This is what's going to prepare them, for college. This is what's going to prepare them for, a certain job position. We can get very caught up in all of these things and not think about what's really important. Who are the adults that you are teaching and nurturing your students to become? Are they balanced? Are they healthy, mind, body, and spirit? Are they adaptive? Are they critical thinkers? Who do you want them to be? Because the curriculum that you create should nurture them to become holistically the adults that you are targeting them to become. Authors that are focused on African centered curriculum are really great to read to get a better understanding of, what's already been done, and, get a strong direction in terms of what can be done based on that. So write these down. Dr. Malefe Asante and Walamu Shuja. And Walamu actually means teacher. So in Walamu Shuja, it's basically saying like teacher and then his last name. And Walamu Baruthi, who you can find, on social media. He has also written a number of books that you can find. Dr. Asa Hilliard, who is now an ancestor and has written so many great books. Saba is one of my favorites, SBA, to really get a good understanding of what it is that we need to be teaching. Dr. Amos Wilson, he wrote Blueprint for Black Power. It's about 900 pages, but it's definitely worth reading, even if it takes you quite some time to get through it. Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, Anthony Browder. Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, he wrote the book Blacks in Science. You definitely want to check that out, to get some ideas for your science curriculum. Blacks in Science by Dr. Ivan Van Sertima. Anthony Browder, he wrote the book Exploding the Myths. You can learn about, the African origins of astronomy, the innovations that we created, in ancient Egypt and beyond, by getting into Dr. Anthony Browder's text. Dr. Milana Karenga, Introduction to Black Studies, definitely a must read. Introduction to Black Studies by Dr. Milana Karenga. Kwame Aje Akoto, he actually wrote an African centered curriculum, or at least, an outline for an African centered curriculum that you can find, I believe, as a standalone book, but it's also outlined in Blueprint for Black Power by Dr. Amos Wilson. Peter C. Morrell, he has a book on African centered pedagogy, which is not what you're teaching, but the way that you're teaching it. Very important to go along with curriculum is to understand African centered pedagogy. So, just to give you a little bit of background about me going into this, I started homeschooling in 2009, so some years ago at this point. started designing African-centered curriculum in 2010. My undergraduate degree was in English and Africana Studies, and my master's in curriculum and instruction with a focus in learning, design, and technology and Africana Studies. And I am currently the founder, director, and also an instructor at Whole Living Academy, which you can find at wholelivingacademy.com. We are an African centered, or you could say culturally grounded online education program. We run pre-K all the way through 12th grade, providing live virtual classes to students, all over the African diaspora. I have traveled to, I used to feel like a bunch of places, but at this point I realized there's so many people that have traveled to so many more places than I have. But it was really a unique and amazing experience for me to begin traveling because that wasn't something that I came up with. I didn't grow up seeing people go to other countries and, travel the world. So it was something that, really felt intimidating and kind of unreal, in the beginning. But it was my goal. Initially I wanted to just be able to go to Africa, any African country. And then, I settled on one particular country that I was really excited about, which is Ghana. And I wanted to figure out, kind of coming into my early 20s, like, how can I get to Ghana? And that's when I learned about study abroad. So, I took that first trip out of the country to study abroad with the University of Houston in Ghana. And from there, just kind of kept traveling, and going on these research trips and these human rights service trips. I began helping with organizing around garment workers and agricultural workers in Dominican Republic with a group, We are back. It looks like we got disconnected for a second, but we're back in now. So I'm just going to share my screen again. Yes, so I started going to the Dominican Republic to help the garment workers and agricultural workers to get higher pay and better safety standards in the factories, and then began doing a lot of work in Haiti on the same island of Hispaniola. I'm actually here in Dominican Republic now, funny enough, helping people in Haiti to get medical service and planting gardens, in different orphanages and communities across the country, helping with food, different things, experience being able to, serve in this way. And it has had a big influence on me as an educator as well. I also have quite some experience at this point teaching African centered courses online and in person. Online, I've been African centered courses for about 7. And we're back. I think the internet keeps cutting out today, but that's okay. We're just going to keep going. And if necessary, then I'll switch over to my hotspot if it keeps cutting out. So yes, I've been teaching from an African-centered perspective online now for about 7 years and in person for about 13 years at this point. And I focus my research, in my master's program with the University of Houston on African-centered curriculum and pedagogy, and developed a curriculum for a group of African-centered schools in Africa based on the IGCSE template, which is like the European standardized testing, as well as assisting with developing the curriculum online for Kamali Academy, for STEAM All Year. Currently in the process of creating curriculum for Maximum Impact Success Academy, and so many other programs over the years, just sharing the unique experiences that grant me the knowledge to be able to assist you with creating curriculum. So, whoa, it can be tricky thinking about creating curriculum for your program or even for your homeschool, because you have to navigate state legislation on curriculum based on where you are. And that can be tough. Every state has different regulations related to what you can and not so much what you can't teach. You can pretty much, teach what you want to teach, but you have to follow certain guidelines depending on what state that you're in terms of the way that you put that together. So just for example, I am based out of Texas, even though right now I'm in Dominican Republic. Texas is my state of residence. So, my son is in college now, but if I was still homeschooling him, I would have to follow Texas regulations, which means that I would have to give notification and I would have to follow these state mandated subjects at a minimum. Now, you can always add more subjects to that. You can also choose the way you want to approach those subjects. These are just the state mandated subjects that you have to teach. So you have to be aware of these things in creating curriculum so that you can make sure that you're following the laws of your particular state or your particular country. In Texas, you do not have to take any assessments or receive any immunizations. In some states, that's different. Also, there are no teacher qualifications for the state of Texas. So, if you have a GED, if you don't have a GED, if you have, an 11th grade education, technically you can still homeschool your child, in the state of Texas if you feel confident about that. So don't feel like, okay, well, I don't have this, I don't have that, so I can't homeschool my child. You can homeschool your child. The required subjects for Texas are math, reading, spelling, and grammar, and a course in good citizenship. And you may be like, okay, what's that? What's good citizenship? You can literally look up, good citizenship courses, and kind of find a template for that online. And again, coming back to your Kaumba, your creativity, switch that up, change that the way that, the way that you want to change it to impart the knowledge that you want to impart unto your children. Okay. Now, with math, even though you have to teach math, it doesn't say, okay, you have to teach math this way, or you have to teach math using XYZ curriculum. You can choose the way that you want to teach your math class. So, of course, you want your children to have all the foundations in math. Now, if you want to move ahead and, have them to be more advanced than the public school system, you can do that. If you want to take your time with things and go more in depth, instead of moving through the topic so quickly, then you can do that. If you want to introduce them to the African history of math and help them to understand things from that perspective and get into studying the Rhine papyrus, you know, and understand our oldest mathematical text, you know, that we have published as a people, then you can do that within your curriculum as well. One thing about creating curriculum is that you have to be willing to learn too, as the parent, as the educator. Because if you don't take the time to learn new things, then you're just teaching the same things that you learned in school. Now, we didn't learn all this in school. We didn't learn about the Rhine mathematical papyrus, you know, back when we were in school, right? We didn't learn about Amos, you know, the African man who outlined this papyrus, who wrote it with, you know, arithmetic and algebraic problems, you know, long, long ago. We didn't learn about these things. We didn't know that we had this genius flowing through our veins based on the curriculum that was being presented to us. We didn't learn about Imhotep, you know, and how he was the oldest known doctor, and also how he built the first, not built, but designed the original pyramids. You know, we didn't learn about these things, but we have the opportunity to teach our children the truth about our history, about our culture, and also to help them become who we recognize that they can become as adults to reach their full potential. Now, Texas is a very easy state to homeschool in. So it may seem like, okay, well, that's not much that I actually have to teach my child. That's something that is definitely manageable. But depending on what state you're in, it can be a little more difficult. Just for example, let me go over to Virginia. Now, in Virginia, you have specific options that you have to fit into. So you would either have to choose to go through an umbrella organization like a school or a church, or going to homeschool your children yourself. You would either have to have them to get standardized testing, or to get an assessment from someone who has a master's degree once per year, and present that to your state. And that's all here in the instructions. The annual evaluation is what that's called. Or you can homeschool with a certified tutor, or you can homeschool with a religious exemption, and you have to just make sure to follow, you know, all of that, you know, paperwork that's there, you know, follow all of those instructions. So if you are in the state of Virginia or states like Virginia, then you may be like, okay, you know, well, how would I design a curriculum, you know, in my particular state? Well, you know, again, you have to understand the homeschool regulations in your area. In Virginia, you have specific subjects that are suggested for you to teach. Let me just go back here so I can show those to you. Now, they don't mandate any particular subjects, but, you know, generally when you talk to them, you know, they do suggest that your children learn, you know, English language arts like grammar, writing, mathematics, science, history, and so on. And you may have to present pictures or even copies of, you know, the books that you're using to, you know, teach your students these topics. Or if they're learning online, you have to take screenshots of what they're learning. So yes, you have a lot of flexibility in terms of what you can do and how you can even create a curriculum for Virginia, but you have to be familiar with what they're looking for. You know, you would have to, you know, probably give the homeschooling office a call and really ask them what they're looking for in those assessments that, you know, you have to present back, so that you can make sure that the curriculum that you're creating is fitting all of those qualifications. And whatever state that you're in, same thing. You have to be familiar with the specific rules for your state so that you can make sure that you're following those rules. So you see, like in New York, you have, much higher regulations for homeschooling. You have to make sure that, you're a competent instructor. You don't have to have any particular qualifications for that, but you do have to take assessments if you're in New York. So that means you have to make sure that within your curriculum, you're preparing the students to be able to take those assessments. You also have state mandated subjects in New York. So we can see here the standardized test that you can choose from: the Iowa Test of Basic Skills, California Achievement Test, Stanford Comprehensive Test of Basic Skills. You can choose any one of these tests for your child to take, but you do have to take those tests if you are in the state of New York. And you would also have to contact them about the subjects that you're required to teach as well. So in thinking about curriculum, you also have to think about the specific rules for your area, or you can end up really having a problem. You want to balance your African-centered teaching with those mandated standards to make sure that you're still giving your children their history, their culture, but also, following the laws of your area. Now, there's a three-pronged approach that we can take to creating African-centered curriculum. So, number one, centering African people and experiences within each subject, like math, science, English language arts. We talked about the Rhind Papyrus, Imhotep. We can look into so many people throughout African history. The Moors, for example, go back to the University of Timbuktu in Mali, to be able to see all of the contributions that we've made to math. And these contributions are not just important because, we can say like, oh, we did that. We have this greatness that is in our history, but also to recognize the greatness that's within us now and to understand the critical thinking approaches to being able to make those accomplishments in the past, right? So just for example, if we look back to ancient Egypt, which was called Kemet at that time, and we see how they participated in agriculture. So what would happen is that, they would have floods, that took place regularly. And when a flood happened, it made the land very fertile afterwards. So when the land became very fertile, they were able to plant, and grow an abundance of food to feed to the people in the area. Now, after the flood and after the planting, there would be a dry season where nothing would grow. So you can kind of think about this, in terms of how our lives move at this time. We can be in a state of abundance, and then, we have enough, and then we're in a state of crisis. And many people can go through these same patterns year after year after year. You might get your tax refund, and now, you're in a state of abundance, and, things are good. And then, time moves on and you're okay. And then it gets to around the holiday season and you're not doing too great, right? And if you're having these same patterns every single year, then that means that we were not applying the critical thinking strategies from Kemet, which would be to actually, plant in abundance during that time of abundance, so that you have a surplus. For example, putting money away, when you have that, additional money, so that, in the time that you just have enough, you can keep things balanced, don't overspend. And then in those times where, things normally get tight, you still have enough to spread around, right? And there are so many, anecdotal experiences that we can, look at from ancient Africa and be able to relate it to critical thinking today, across all subjects. Utilizing African objects and motifs like, a game of Mancala, cowrie shells, posters. That's also a part of, your African-centered classroom. And you can include those aspects in the curriculum as well. Children can use Mancala to learn, a deeper aspect of math and use the cowrie shells for early counting. Just kind of going back to centering African people and experiences within each subject for a moment. George Washington Carver is very important to the field of science. So we would want to make sure that, he's included within that curriculum, as well as all of the other great scientists that have, contributed throughout time. I want to kind of show you, just coming back to number 2, the game of Mancala, if it's not something that you're familiar with. This is Mancala, and you can, find this game on Amazon. You can find it, generally at local stores. There are even online versions of the game for your children to, get involved, and they will learn to become better at math through playing this game. If you play it with them, learn it with them, you will also become better at math, better at critical thinking, and it's a ton of fun. So let's just switch back to the slide here. You also want to look at implementing African-centered pedagogy, being student-centered, having your children to participate in a conversation about what they're learning and how they feel about it and what they would like to learn next. Storytelling, telling stories aloud, taking turns reading aloud or telling stories aloud. Call and response, using I go and I may. Spending time in nature and learning from nature. These are all African-centered approaches to learning. Now, if you're looking at African-centered mathematics, you want to definitely talk about Imhotep. You want to definitely talk about the Rhind Papyrus, written by Ahmose, also known as Ahmes. You want to definitely talk about the Ashango bone, which is the oldest known math tool to this day. And it was found in Africa, in the Congo, and it dates back to about 25,000 years ago. And it's a bone tool that was used as one of the earliest, math tools. So that also means that African people, Black people, were the first people to do math. Very important to understand, because a lot of our children feel like we're not good at math. Like there are other cultures that may be better at math than us, without naming those cultures. But that's not accurate. It's definitely inside of us. We just have to, bring it out through study and practice, and we can excel to the highest levels. Absolutely. We can look at how mathematics was utilized in ancient Kemet within the curriculum, and in more recent times, like in Moorish history, and look at the critical thinking skills we can learn from our ancestors and how they created and utilized math, their African math systems, and so on. The great thing about being in this time period in the 21st century is that you can find anything. You don't have to go, and search all over the world to be able to find math systems from different African countries from antiquity. You can find ancient Egyptian math. You can find other ancient African math systems very easily just by doing a quick Google search. Now, if we're talking about an African-centered approach to English language arts, we would focus more on oral reports and not everything having to be answered in written form. Storytelling, learning about literature from the diaspora within the African continent, Francophone African writers in Europe, Afro Caribbean authors, African American authors, and so on. Also, including those ancient texts like the teachings of Ptahhotep, selections from the Hujah, and you can even use those for copy work. Let's talk about what copy work is for just a moment. So, if you look up selection from the Hujah, now I'm going to pull it up here on the screen. This is a text that has been put into written form, but it is an ancient text, that has been translated so that we're able to, access it today. And let me see if I can show you the inside of the book here. Here we go. Just going to full screen this. Let's see. And they're not letting us see the inside of it without, logging in to actually borrow the book. So that's what I'll do. I will log in and borrow the book so that we can see the inside of it, and I can talk to you about what copy work is and why that's important. Okay, here we go. Okay, so we can see here, I just kind of go back to the beginning. Here's just the introduction. Okay, let me just kind of see if I can zoom it in. Okay, so blessed is he who sits in the hands of Amen Ra, for it is he who directs the timid, who rescues the humble and the needy, who gives the breath of life to the one whom he loves and grants him or her a long life in the west of Thebes. So we see here these ancient, prayers and poems, and you can just copy down, a sentence or two that resonates with you, and then have your children that are still learning, to spell, to write, to just copy down the same thing that you wrote without any changes in their best handwriting. Okay. And that is what copy work is. So I wanted to get to this part with the Proverbs. For example, we see here, rob not the poor of their good, the humble whom you know, for the poor's belongings are bread to them, and to take them away is to stop up their nose. And you can talk about what that means, with your students, but also use it for their handwriting practice by having them to copy it exactly, using their best handwriting and making sure that they also copy down the punctuation that is there, right? People fall low through greed. That's a whole lesson right there. Just breaking that down and talking about it. Though you are greedy, it yields you nothing. Though you steal, you do not benefit by it. Wow. That's the whole lesson right there. Definitely. And also a handwriting activity. So these are ideas that you can incorporate into your curriculum. Now, when we're talking about English language arts, it can also include history. You can read Classical Africa by Dr. Molefe Asante, other texts. It can be cross curricular. You can look at home team history on YouTube, watch videos there, and then talk about them, write about them, or a combination of both. Crash Course of African American History with Clint Smith is another great resource. Writing activities like journaling, summarizing, response, songs, poetry, raps, skits, speeches. You don't have to limit the student responses to just paragraph and essays because that's how we came up. You know, we're going to read this chapter and then we're going to write a paragraph about it. What about we're going to read this chapter and then we're going to write a rap about it, 16 bars, or you're going to write a skit about it and then perform it, right? Now, when we go into talking about science and invention as parallel to science, we can look at the 4 C's of 21st century learning: critical thinking, creative thinking, communicating, and collaborating. Okay. Um, or we could call this African centered learning for everybody because all of these aspects that we call the 4 C's of 21st century learning within academia, they're really African centered learning when you think about it. Critical thinking, critical inquiry, right? Creative thinking, today is Kumba, creativity, communicating, we communicate, oral response, high levels of participation, call and response, collaborating, group work, right? You see those parallels coming back to what we talked about earlier. So, you know, we've been in the 21st century since before the first century. George Washington Carver, he would take one plant and make hundreds of innovations just based on that one plant. He created hundreds of innovations with the soybean, with the peanut, with the sweet potato. You can give your students a plant or an item and ask them to conceptualize as many uses as possible for it. And that can be a part of your curriculum. And that goes back to creative thinking, critical thinking. If you have them to do it in a group, they're also collaborating as well. You have to, of course, take the time to learn our contributions in each field. In astronomy, you know, we know probably about Kemet and, you know, the contributions that we made to astronomy in Kemet, but we have to take the time to learn about the Dogon as well. And you can read Exploding the Myths by Anthony Browder. You can read Blacks in Science by Ivan Van Sertima to be able to get a better understanding of these things and integrate these lessons back into your curriculum. African martial arts is a science. Kemetic yoga is a science. You know, and there are also physical activities that can help our children to be, you know, healthier, more fit, you know, for the long run, have these healthy physical habits. But it's not just about the body, it's also about the mind. It's about being centered. It's about, you know, being healthy mentally and spiritually, emotionally. So, you know, introducing them to these practices, not just in terms of the physical practices, but also the philosophies behind the physical practices can be a part of your science curriculum. In geography, you want to make sure to include the countries in the diaspora, in Africa, in Central America, South America, and not just, you know, learning the states of the United States. You know, help your children, help your students to be really global. Learn the continents, the oceans, the states, the capitals, and all of these places. You can also introduce your students to African languages like Kiswahili and or Yoruba. Kiswahili, they can begin to learn with Whole Living Academy or with Duolingo. You know, with Duolingo, they don't have that same interaction that they would have with Whole Living Academy. So I would definitely suggest joining us for that class. For Yoruba, you can join Sankofa Homeschool with Mama Monica Utzi. You know, she has a great Yoruba class there you can look into. Meta Netter, there may be some classes with Sankofa Homeschool or the Liberated Minds Homeschool platform where your children can learn the hieroglyphics, or you can look into learning hieroglyphics through, free online videos, on YouTube. Everything's pretty much available for free at this point. Now, I would also say to have your children to learn Spanish and French because of colonialism. These are the major languages of the African diaspora, along with English and Portuguese. So, if you can speak English, Spanish, French, and Portuguese, you can communicate with most people around the African diaspora and develop business relationships, be able to grow your wealth, develop friendships. So, I would definitely say, to take that time while they're still children, they still have so much free time, to go ahead and learn Spanish, French, Portuguese, Kiswahili, Yoruba. Once you start learning languages, it just becomes easier to learn the next language and the next language. And even if you don't know all of those languages, you can still sign them up for classes with Whole Living Academies, Sankofa Homeschool, Liberated Minds, so that they can still be able to gain that type of fluency. Now, how long should school days be? They can be as long or short as you want as a parent, but ideally, for elementary school students, you want to have at least 2 or 3 hours a day. If it's more, that's okay, but you don't need to, have them sitting there learning for 8 hours. That's a fallacy. Middle and high school, it can be 3, 4 hours for middle school. It can be a bit more if you like, but it doesn't really need to be. 4 to 6 hours for high school students, depending on their state requirements. More focus on independent work, independent research, projects, apprenticeships, entrepreneurship, because at that point, they're really preparing to be adults. So you want them to have adult skills. You don't want them to just know how to take a test. You want them to know how to start a business, how to, have a career, right? You want them to know how to, really have the practice of things and not just the theory of it. And I'm just going to check the chat box to see. Okay. Hi, Rebecca. Yes. So I see that some folks are participating in the chat box here. Okay. So what is most important? The job market is constantly changing. It's uncertain. We have AI technology out there now. So if we're just thinking about things in terms of, okay, I want my child to learn coding because that's going to help them to get a good job. 10 years from now, most of the coding will probably be done by AI. So they need to know how to use AI technologies as well. They may need to know how to do machine learning to be able to start designing their own AIs, right? So you have to think about who our children are becoming overall rather than just them learning something to go towards a specific college or a specific job. You want them to be adaptive. You want them to be innovative. You want them to love learning. If they love learning, then the same way that they learned about coding 5 years ago, they can learn about artificial intelligence and machine learning now and not feel like, oh, this is too much or this is too hard. No, they'll just be like, okay, great. This is something I can understand. This is something that's going to give me more opportunities. What else should we include? Personal finance and investing, running a business, holistic health, life skills like home maintenance, cooking, sewing. You still got to know how to do real stuff. Gardening, knowing how to drive, right? Going back to holistic health, how to heal with nature in every situation. This year, a lot of people have been unwell, within my circle. And I've been, sending out like elderberry and golden seal, to so many friends and loved ones. And we just need to know how to use those things so that, we don't end up in a situation where we're spending time suffering or where we're spending a lot of money on, unnecessary doctor's visits. Not saying we shouldn't go to the doctor, but there are some things that we can handle at home if we have the information to do so. With personal finance, they need to understand things like credit scores too. Even if we don't believe that the best system, we're in this system right now. So we need to know how to master it and how to get the most out of it. Understanding not just running a business in terms of like profit and overhead, and LLCs, but also team building, soft skills, leadership. These are all important. It can be included within your curriculum. Reading daily never gets old, right? Stay on top of the emerging technologies that are coming out now, and you can subscribe to different platforms where you may get notifications, YouTube channels that are going to keep you on top of the emerging technologies, AR, VR, and so on, so that you can introduce them to your students. So I'm just going to look here in the chat box to see if there are any questions. And if there are not any questions, then we are going to get ready to go ahead and take a break. And I'm going to end the stream, and we'll be back in 15 minutes for how to build a financially sustainable education program online or in person. Thank you, everybody.